Assalamu alaikum. Welcome again to another episode of Learning with Masjid As-Sabur. We have our esteemed guests here today. We have Imam Abu Qadir, Imam Michael Salam, and Imam Abdul Rauf. We're going to begin as we always do, opening with our Fatiha. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikhs.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Alhamdulillah, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you all here today. I'd like to begin by asking you guys a very important question that I feel our viewers would love to know. What started, when and what and how did the prison chaplaincy start, for Muslim chaplains start here in the United States, here in California?
I think Sheikh Raouf can.
I'll take care of that. Based on research, we actually traced the beginning of the CDC here in California to actually Milan, Michigan, federal prison in Milan, Michigan, in 1942, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was arrested for not short version is not being drafted into World War II, and he was arrested. But not only he was arrested, but many of his male followers at the time, and some reports say somewhere between 70 to 100, and they went into the federal prison system. That was the biggest group of declared committed Muslims to go into the U.S. penal system. And they were there not only as declared Muslims, but also they proselytized when they were in prison. They weren't hiding their Islamic identity, and they were trying to spread it. Well, the California prison system is one of the end results of that spread of Islam that began in 1942. It's a long story. We only got 50.
Alhamdulillah, but even that, I was unaware of that.
Yeah. Right, yeah. So obviously we know, just to kind of give a brief addition to that, we know in 1940, so Elijah Muhammad went to prison in 1942, he got out in 1946. In 1946, Malcolm Little was going to prison. And he found traces of Islam in prison when he was there.
Right.
And of course, we know that he also did that. He spread what he learned when he eventually converted in prison. He began to get converts himself in prison. Mm-hmm. And so that process percolated throughout the prison systems in America. African Americans then come to, in bigger numbers, then come to California to the 50s, or actually in the late 40s after the war. They began to come here because of the war industries and what have you. And so the California prisons became more, it was predominantly white, and then blacks began to come to prison, and they began to form a opposition to the white supremacist nature of the prison system there.
Right.
And eventually the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad got embedded in the California prison system, mostly in the 50s. In the early 60s, then we know there was a large population of, there were only 9 prisons, so men's prisons in California at the time. So in 1962, the Muslim minister in San Quentin was shot on the yard. His name was Booker T. Johnson.
Now, this was a free staff or
No,
somewhat a
no,
convict?
convict. There were no free staff.
Okay.
The version of Islam that the Nation of Islam was practicing at the time was not permitted in prisons.
Okay.
But it was there, it was growing among the African American prisoners because it served as a bulwark against the white supremacist nature of not only the prisoners at the time, who were a majority population white prisoners, but also the guards and the administration. You know, and so blacks began to be attracted to it because it, you know, it provided protection, it provided identity, and all those other things that we know gangs or groups like that, when they initially formed, provide for people who are looking for protection mostly, identification with people with similar ideas that they have. And it was, of course, Islam, we know, was there, at least in language, if not in detail.
So fast forwarding, when does it actually get to the point where now we're having chaplains and imams come in as free staff?
In the late 1960s, early 70s for sure, because Minister Billy, who was my minister at the time, Billy X. Stevens, used to visit periodically. We know Minister
Bashir
Muhammad used to come to the prisons. He was the minister in Los Angeles. So that was periodic and under special circumstances, but there were no chaplains because the religion was not even recognized on the books. But because there was such a large presence of Muslims there, the administration, who have a kind of wisdom how to keep things, you know, manageable, they would allow that from time to time under special circumstances. Ministers would come in. After Abdul Karim Hassan came to Los Angeles in 1971, that kind of started a focused approach to trying to get the religion. 1970, there was a federal ruling that, because all this time Muslims are filing, they're filing writs to have the religion recognized, because they had numbers. They had, when the minister was killed on the yard, almost 100 prisoners refused to go to their cells that night. So, you know, we got 100 guys saying they ain't gonna do something at one time in the prison. That's a lot of, they got more, and they probably had maybe another 200 or 300 of sympathizers who didn't demonstrate. They refused to lock up.
So like most things that we have now in the CDC and California prison system, the actual battle was fought on the ground by the inmates themselves.
And then with support as much as possible from outside. When Minister Abdul Karim Hassan, he began to, the federal ruling happened in 1970. Which
was a writ, I'm sure, was filed by an inmate.
That the inmates were filing, and they won that. And so now they had to put Qurans in the libraries of all the CDC. They had to allow ministers from, at that time, the Muslim ministers, which were Nation of Islam members, not quote unquote Orthodox Muslims, as the term began to be used at some point in time. So, and they had to provide, Muhammad Speaks newspapers became legitimate to come into the prison system. That was in the early 70s. Abdul Karim Hassan, the minister Abdul Karim Hassan, was Imam Abdul Karim Hassan now. He came to the West Coast, and then he started an active Muslim presence on the advisory board. And he and Minister Earl Shaw were functioned on the advisory board. And what was it called?
The State Advisory Board.
State Advisory Council on Religion.
Yeah, SACR. It's called SACR.
Right.
So he was on that board to advise the prison system about Muslim concerns and issues in the prison system. And then in about 1973, 74, Minister Earl Shaw began to visit all the prisons in the system. He had a brown card, or a card that allowed him to go into all the prisons in the system. He traveled up and down the state because Minister Abdul Karim Hassan was over all the mosques outside of the prison. So at any rate, but we didn't get the first. So and then his headquarters was Chino, and then he became the first contract minister.
And what year was this?
1974, 1975, in that time frame.
Let me say this too, just to interject. In the 70s, I was in the prison.
Okay, yeah.
So though the federal lawsuit had been won, acknowledging that we had rights as Muslim inmates to receive literature and things like that, those things trickled down, kind of like the Emancipation Proclamation, and we found out 3 years later, Juneteenth. So we still had to fight to get those rights, and we filed a class action suit in 1972 with Lewis Richardson, who was our inmate minister at that time. Alfred Washington was the captain, and it was a whole lot of struggle to even get the prison administration to accept that.
What was on the books? Right?
What was on the books, and then some of those things were renegotiated. That we had filed the lawsuits in 1973, and we negotiated that they would acknowledge that we had a right to have a Muslim minister, and they put that into the CDCR handbook.
Oh, okay.
And that was built upon later when Earl Shaw and Minister Imam Abdul Karim Hassan began to work with Sacramento to actually create positions. Right. And some of the first positions were contract positions, like you said. Minister Billy used to come in, Minister Bashir Salam used to come in, and then later Imam John Fakir and Earl Shaw, they came, they were like the second wave, and it became more formalized. Right. Under their administration and leadership.
The first official imam who became a chaplain, as with chaplains, right, was John Fakir in Northern California in about 1978 after Imam W.D. Muhammad came and visited San.
Whereas this is
him and Yusuf Islam actually
they battle on that one.
Him and Yusuf Islam actually were hired at the same time.
I interviewed Yusuf Islam.
Yeah, right.
And he always
said
Fakir was there. Okay. And then Fakir came he was at CMC.
Fakir?
No. Yusuf Islam was at CMC.
Mm-hmm.
Fakir was at San Quentin. And then when he he transferred us, and then he went to Tehachapi.
Yeah.
So that's what Yusuf Islam said. Rest in peace.
An abundance of knowledge here, and as you already stated, we could do a separate show just on the inception of the prison chaplaincy for the Muslims. But I have a question that I would like each of you to take a brief time to respond to. My audience with the young viewers, I deal with a lot of you. They've never seen Malcolm X, never read the book Malcolm X. So the transformation and how important it is to have that exposure to Islam. I would like for each of you to take a moment to briefly explain how important it is to have Islam in prison, where you have our undivided attention. And I'm saying our as clearly as someone who went through that system.
Well, speaking from a personal standpoint, I was in prison myself, so it was a very wonderful foundation for me. I was a 20-year-old young man, So when Islam came to me through the Nation of Islam, the thing that I realized once I, took the initiative to accept it, was that I needed that discipline. I needed that discipline foundation to be successful in my life, It's one thing to have knowledge, but if you're not disciplined enough to put it into practice, then it won't benefit you at all. So that was one of the main things I got from Islam at that time, was a sense of discipline. And it really structured me in a sense where I could come out and be a productive citizen, in society. So I think as a young person, because our hormones are all over, we're out of whack. You're young, you're warrior status, you're ready to fight, and we need that spirit, but it has to be harnessed in a way where it'll be beneficial. Right. So for me, the number one thing, and I'm gonna share this real quickly, man, and Yahya Shabazz was in prison with me. Rashid Shabazz. Right. But one of the things, they were trying to convert me to Islam. Yeah. So, I was following the revolutionary guys. I wanted to write poetry. I was with all these cats, man. Yeah. So they would say, brother, you need to come to Islam. So I didn't want, I'm making an excuse. I'll try to be brief as possible. I said, man, when I come over, I want to be clean. I don't want to be no fake Muslim. I want to be a real Muslim when I come to Islam, right? So Yahya told me, man, he said, look, man, he said, Where you at right now? You in the mud. He said, Islam is the water. How you gonna get clean if you in the mud? Blew my little logic away. Blew my little logic away, and I accepted it. And like again, man, 2 reasons, man. I went back to my cell. I was federal prison. I did federal time. We had single cells back in the time. I went back to my cell and actually cried. 2 reasons. I have been so ignorant with my life. And then the second was, I can't blame nobody else, man. I got to change my life for me. Right. So to the youngsters, I'm saying this is a form of discipline that will transform your life beyond what you can even imagine.
Alhamdulillah.
All right. And Allah knows best. You know?
Alhamdulillah. Shay?
For me, I was 19 years old when I went to prison. And I realized I knew a little something about Islam before going to prison. And I kind of felt like I was being punished by my own poor choices. And I ended up in prison because I rebelled against following the direction that Islam was offering me. So I had a sense of remorse when I went to prison. And I remember being in the county jail, and a newspaper, Muhammad Speaks newspaper, came into the county jail. And in the centerfold, usually there's an article from Elijah Muhammad. This particular paper didn't have an article from Elijah Muhammad. They had one verse from the Holy Quran. I think it's Surah 27. And it said, "Woe is me. Would that I had taken away with the messenger." And that's all it said. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, man, if I'd only followed Elijah Muhammad, I wouldn't be in this mess.
That's right.
And so at that particular point, I made up in my mind with sincerity that wherever I go, I'm going to be a Muslim, and I'm going to be a good Muslim. So I had a kind of like a conversion at that point. And then when I got to death row, because I ended up going to death row because of the nature of the crime I had committed, and I wrote my letter to join the Nation of Islam. It was a Muslim brother already on death row from San Diego when I got there, so he had a copy of the letter and everything. So I wrote my letter, sent my letter off, and I got the letter back from Elijah Muhammad accepting me into the Lost Found Nation of Islam. My name was being registered in the Book of Life, and we got the little catechism. And one of the things it said is your own self is a righteous Muslim.
That's right.
So that was something that I tried to measure up to. I said I want to be a Muslim. I want to be a good Muslim. I started learning my prayers and doing other things. And as I said, I was on death row, so I was in an isolated kind of situation. I was kind of like in an incubator. So I wasn't around a lot of other people to get my ideas from. Be Islam, be a Muslim like this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. So I got my information from books. So I was reading the Quran, I was reading Hadith, I was reading Islamic history books and things like that. And then I was looking at the Muslims who were already there, who claimed that they were Muslims before they came, and I was looking at them like, yeah, well, I can't use you as an example because if you were a Muslim, you shouldn't have been in this trap.
That's right.
So I accepted what they had to say with a grain of salt. I kind of, I wasn't trying to emulate the people that were in there saying they were Muslims before they came to prison, because Islam would keep you from being in prison. Mm-hmm. And I was very sincere about trying to make myself a better person. And I was attracted to the ideas of the Nation of Islam that required us to accept responsibility for ourselves.
That's right.
And to make our own self better, and then to work to make our communities better, to learn knowledge that would enable us to compete with other people in the society. So I began to go to school. I went to college while I was there. I learned trades while I was there. I studied different sciences that benefited me later on when I became free. And I tried to use that time to learn things that would enable me to empower myself once I came home.
Very quickly, I have to interject. Being on death row, what is your focal point? Are you trying to save your soul? Are you trying to still be liberated? Or is it a sense of both?
It was a sense of both. I came to the conclusion while I was there that I didn't believe I was going to die there.
Okay.
And I had a renewed sense of hope because of what I was receiving from my studies of Islam as it was being presented to me in the Nation of Islam. But that wasn't the only thing I was reading. I was reading Islam, just from Islamic books Ibn Khaldun, other scholars in Islam. I was reading all of that information that was going into me, and I became hopeful. And I remember having discussion with some of my fellow prisoners on death row, saying, I'm not going to die here. And they said, what are you talking about, you ain't going to die here? I said, it don't make sense for me to die here. I said, Allah going to bless me to get out of here, because it don't make sense for me to have this enlightenment that I have now to die with it. Now, when I was ignorant and a fool to the 10th power, it made all the sense in the world.
That's right.
And so they said, oh, man, you tripping. And they called me by my nickname, which was Large. They said, oh, Large, you tripping, man. That's that LSD you used to take. And I said, no, I'm not going to die here. I said, Elijah Muhammad might send me to Peru or something.
That's right.
But that was the belief I had. And since that time, fortunately, Elijah Muhammad didn't get to send me, but his son, Imam W.D. Muhammad, sent me to Thailand, he sent me to China, he sent me to Mexico, Turkey, all on doing business and trade on behalf of the Muslim community.
Alhamdulillah.
So it came true.
Alhamdulillah.
Imam Abdul Rauf.
I'll just add this. I remember from the autobiography of those, he said that youngsters are not reading it.
Right.
And when Malcolm was in that same situation, he was in prison and kind of living a, undirected life in prison. His brother, who had accepted, his younger brother who had accepted Islam, wrote him and told him, if you stop eating pork and stop smoking cigarettes, I'll show you how you can get out of prison.
Right.
So I'm going back to what he said about discipline,
That's right.
Yeah.
which Islam provides then and now. When we were in the Nation of Islam, it provided that, maybe to a much more focused degree when we were in the Nation of Islam. But even now, Islam generally is a discipline, a way of life that once one adheres to it, they improve their life. And so we know Malcolm X took that advice from his brother eventually. Of course, his life began to change, and we recommend it still. It's still good. We should send some autobiographies we should require at whatever program you're in. And give a prize or something if they read it.
Well, they can watch the movie now.
Oh,
I'm
that's
just
right, yeah.
trying to encourage them to even
That's
just
right.
take the time. They're so everything is technology,
That's right.
visual.
That's
Yeah.
right.
The reading is more beneficial because the movie is sensationalized and it leaves out important details. Mm-hmm. Malcolm learned how to pray the way Muslims pray all over the world while he was still in prison.
Right.
One of the brothers from the Boston Mosque in Boston brought him the prayers while he was still in prison. So he learned how to pray the different positions and all of that while he was still in prison. So there are many distortions that people think that Malcolm didn't know Islam prior to going to pilgrimage. Yeah. But he went to Malcolm in 1959 went to, he performed Umrah. He didn't perform the Hajj because he went to make sure it was going to be safe for Elijah Muhammad and his family to go. But he got sick while he was there and ended up not making the Hajj himself. And that's important. And what attracted Malcolm was many of the people who came into the Nation of Islam in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were influenced by Marcus Garvey's movement, a nationalistic movement where it focused on black people doing what they needed to do for themselves and their communities. And that message was still very attractive in the 60s that attracted many of us.
Alhamdulillah. I'll say, to echo what Imam Michael Salam said, for me, in my search to find something that was powerful enough to combat the so-called brotherhood that I had from gang life and that I had brought to prison from the streets, everything that I had explored, it just wasn't powerful enough to combat that. If you're gonna take something, as you always say, when you're clutching something, right. If you're gonna take that from me, if you're gonna take gang life from me, what are you gonna replace it with? That's as powerful. Right. And so Islam was as powerful, or much more powerful. Right. so powerful that I could go back and tell my gang that I'm done. I found something much more powerful than what you guys are on.
Exactly.
Come with me,
I'm done. Right. And in fact, you guys need to follow me over here.
That's right. That's
Because
right.
it was the discipline, like you said. There was nothing else that was going to stop me from thinking that I miraculously could bring morals and principles and all these things that Islam has. I gave up that. I thought I could bring that to street life.
Right.
You know, we gonna really honor these codes,
Right.
and we gonna really live up to this. You know, we're gonna be a different breed of a gangster. And I was like, no, that's impossible. I don't even think you would call it utopian, because utopian is something good, right? Right. It was just it was foolish.
Right.
But definitely for me, it was the discipline that attracted me, and of course, the Malcolm X autobiography by Alex Haley was the first book that I read that really opened my breast to Islam. And of course, after that, I was in the fold, following the brothers.
See, in my experience, when I was in the Nation of Islam in prison, we wouldn't read. We were forbidden to read Malcolm's autobiography. That was actually it was politically disapproved. So we didn't read the biography, but we did read Uzi and Odom's book, and we read Eric Lincoln's book, Black Muslims in America, and Black Nationalism, which had some of the same ideas that you found in Malcolm's book.
Well, listen, no one moved. For the first time in my life, I'm not accepting instructions from y'all for this moment. Just for this moment. These are all my mentors. And so no one move, no one get out of their seats. We're gonna have you back for the second half of the show. Right now we're gonna conclude this show, and we're gonna close out with Asr Brothers. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And remember, you can come and be with us here at the Masjid. Juma is every Friday, beginning at the first Adhan is called at 1 o'clock. The Khutbah actually starts at 1:30. We're located here at 4926 15th Avenue in Sacramento. Bring your children, bring your wives, come out brothers, come out sisters, come and learn with us here at Learning with Masjid As-Sabur.